Hi, so welcome to this week's lecture. I'm going to not so much talk about history learning in any particularly new way today. I'm just going to focus on some tried and tested approaches that teachers have developed to assure themselves that they're having the maximum impact on the student learning. So I'm going to talk really about professional processes, and I'm going to link that to the idea of action research as a methodology, a framework in which we can locate some of this work. So in the first part of the lecture, I'm going to just say something briefly by way of introducing the tradition of action research for teachers. Secondly, we're going to focus in on one example of some university researchers working with a teacher on a history teaching intervention, and get some notion of how all of these ideas might align up together so that you could really measure impact in specific ways. And then finally, in the third part, I'll say something about how this links together into assignment 3. So the first thing to say, I'm going to just work through a couple of definitions about action research. The first one from Koshi puts it like this. I consider action research as a constructive inquiry during which the researcher constructs his or her knowledge of specific issues through planning, acting, evaluating, refining, and learning from experience. So it's a continuous learning process in which the researcher learns and also shares the newly generated knowledge with those who may benefit from it. So the primary defining feature, if you like, of action research here is that it's about the person doing the action research and their personal construction of meaning from a process that they're already engaged in. So it's adding research as a dimension to professional action. Carr and Kemmis put it like this. It's similar but slightly different, their definition. A form of inquiry undertaken by participants in situations in order to improve rationality and justice of their own social or educational practices, as well as their understanding of these practices. So here they just add the caveat that as well as understanding the situation better, that is in order for us to change the situation. And in our case, that's in order to make our teaching more effective, more efficient, and to have a greater impact on the learners. But often action research is also particularly concerned with closing gaps between learners, so making sure that all children benefit to the maximum degree from the kind of teaching that we undertake. And the third definition is a slight variation on the same themes. Reason and Bradbury say it's about working towards practical outcomes and about creating new forms of understanding. And then they add this bit: since action without understanding is blind, theory without action is meaningless. So the extra layer that they're adding to the definition, if you like, is that it enables the practitioner to engage with some theoretical context in which they can make sense of their practice. So we need to not just think about the practicalities of what we're doing, but relate that to theory and use theory to shed light on the practice, as well as using practice to help us understand the theory better. And then finally, Cohen and Mannion talk about it like this. This is from their handbook on research methods in education. Essentially, they say action research is an on-the-spot procedure designed to deal with a concrete problem located in an immediate situation. This means that ideally the step-by-step process is constantly monitored over varying periods of time and by a variety of mechanisms, so that the ensuing feedback may be translated into modifications, adjustments, directional changes, redefinitions as necessary, so as to bring lasting benefit to the ongoing process itself rather than to some future occasion. And what's important here, and it's very distinctive about action research, is that we're aligning research with change. So it's not, as we normally expect with research, that we need to be fairly objective about measuring something which we can draw some boundaries around, if you like, that we identify the thing it is we want to research and then we research it. And it would be wrong for the person researching it to change it in the middle of the research project. But this is what action research is all about, that as we gather information, as we reflect on the processes, as we think more clearly, then we should be adapting our practice to edge towards improvements. So really you can see why action research has a particularly appealing dimension for people involved in classroom practice, because it's a way of building aspects of research into the everyday practices of teaching, reviewing, and facilitating learning. So one way to think about this comes from the Pollard model, and this action research is often captured in cyclical diagrams. So if we start at the top here with a process of reflection, we construct a plan. We might think about this as a lesson plan or a scheme of work. We make our educational provisions, we enact them in the classroom, then we collect evidence about the impact we're having on the learners. We then analyse the evidence, we evaluate the extent to which that evidence gives us kind of reliable conclusions, and then we reflect on that afresh, and that feeds back into the subsequent planning cycle. So in 3 easy steps, that's about identifying an issue for improvement, planning and implementing an intervention which is designed to secure that improvement, and then being rigorous and methodical about collecting information that can help us evaluate the impact of our intervention. So here's the same principle taken into an ongoing spiral of research. So we start at the bottom of this with action research cycle number 1, diagnose the problem, plan, take action, evaluate it, and then that feeds back into the next action research loop. And so action research is seen as cyclical, but it's often linked together into spirals, and the idea is that the outcome of one cycle feeds directly into the next cycle, and you go through as many cycles as you need to in order to secure improvement. And very often this is linked to how much time we have or how long we're going to work with a particular group of people, rather than any assumption that it would be over naturally because we've reached perfection. This is not a model which is informed by achieving perfection. It's a model which is rooted in the commitment to continual progress. Another way of looking at this is a slightly more linear way of capturing the same information from Elliot, is just to say that you go through these different cycles, which are here represented as different stages. So you identify the initial idea, you do some thinking about it, which Elliot calls reconnaissance, you come up with a plan, you implement the action plan in various steps, you monitor the impact of that. That feeds into a new phase of reconnaissance, just thinking about the situation, revising your general understanding of the situation, and then moves into an amended plan. So this can continue in as many cycles as makes sense to fit into what you're doing. Now, the final thing I'm going to say, just by way of introducing this paradigm of teacher-led research, is to link back to Schoen. And Schoen wrote an influential book in 1987 on the reflective practitioner, and this is much quoted in education research and in the professional literature about what it is to be a teacher. And Schoen says, when a practitioner sets a problem, she or he chooses and names the things that they will notice. And through complementary acts of naming and framing, the practitioner selects things for attention and organises them, guided by an appreciation of the situation that gives it coherence, and they set a direction for action. Depending on our disciplinary backgrounds, organisational roles, past histories, interests and perspectives, we frame problematic situations in different ways. Often a problematic situation presents itself as a unique case. So this is at the core, if you like, of what Schoen says is the nature of our claim to professional knowledge. He says it's not that we have a list of technical things that we do as history teachers that non-history teachers can't do, although that is certainly partly the case. But the essence of what makes an outstanding history teacher isn't just that they know more things about teaching history than a mediocre history teacher. It's that they orientate themselves towards problems of history learning in specific ways. And partly that's built on their expanding knowledge and experience, but partly it's also premised on a commitment to problematize learning and to reflect rigorously on that. So what makes your claim to expertise different from another teacher's claim to expertise in the history classroom is that you frame the problems in history specific ways. So this is not just about saying some students are finding it difficult to move up the Bloom's taxonomy. This is about understanding that what the particular challenges are of understanding causal reasoning, or what the particular challenges of historical empathy might be. And so the more we get used to using this professional language, the more we use that in the classroom to frame problems that students might be experiencing, the more we start to develop our own sense of professionalism. So these ideas are important because they situate the teacher as an active researcher into their own practice and into the phenomenon of students' learning. And that reflective and research-oriented approach is embedded in their teaching and learning in the day-to-day classroom. So I just wanted to start off with that slightly abstracted introduction to a tradition of research, because in the second part of the lecture I'm going to focus on a particular example of this kind of research in action in a history project, and it just helps, I think, to not see the two writers that we're going to look at as slightly eccentric researchers, but to locate them in this broader tradition of research, which, as I say, is very different from the traditional methods of positivist educational research, but nevertheless is really useful for us thinking about how we build our own professional knowledge. So that's the end of the first part, and we'll move on and look at this applied case study in part two.